Welcome to another edition of Storytime. Today we are reading the book. Where is it at? We are reading the book called Valley of the Dolls. There she is. I got to tell you that this is one book that I really didn't expect to enjoy. And after reading it, thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm so glad I did. It's written by a woman named Jacqueline Susann. It's a pretty long book, and so it's an easy read, but it's a long book, and it's good that it's long because the story is so good. This might be kind of a long presentation as well. So I want to really get into it. So it talks about the main character is Anne. She's from some small town outside of Boston, but she's in New York City, where she says it's the most exciting city in the world. She's so beautiful, though. She's told that she should be a model, but all she really wants to do is be a secretary. When she leaves her town, it's called Lawrenceville. When she leaves Lawrenceville, you can see what she says here. She would never go back to Lawrenceville. She hadn't just left Lawrenceville, she had escaped. And so that's what she felt about her hometown. She needed something bigger. She needed something more exciting. She remembered her life there on the train in New York, and knowing how reserved and how proper and old school Lawrenceville was, and she wasn't like that. And her family told her she should settle down and marry a nice man, but she's like, I don't love anybody here. And her relatives say things like you see at the bottom of this screen: no man can be loved. She remembers asking a question about kissing a man, and she's told, you're a lady, Anne. That's why you don't like kissing. No lady does. But her father passed away and left her $5,000, so that's what she uses to move to New York City. She meets a man named Henry Bellamy, who is interviewing her to be a secretary at their. It's like an agency. It's like a theatrical agency, but they're all attorneys there. And it's funny that during the interview, because she's so beautiful, of her blonde hair and her glacial blue eyes, that Henry Bellamy was the one who was nervous. But they hire her to be an assistant. She was paid $75 a week, which she thought was amazing. Her room only cost $18. I'm not sure if that's a week or a month, and her food is only $15. So she had more money than she could spend. She met a girl who was also living in the same house as she was. Neely is her name. And so Neely and Anne are going to become good friends. There was one day all this excitement in the office that Lion Burke is coming back. He used to be a partner in the theatrical agency, but he went off to war, and now he's coming back. All the other secretaries were like, oh, I think he's going to like you, Anne. So meanwhile, she is, let's see if it's Alan Cooper. Hang on a second here. Yes, Alan Cooper. He meets Alan Cooper. And Alan is just like kind of a drink of water. He's not very exciting. But he kept seeing him, as you can see by this statement. She continued to see him because he made no demands upon her. Sometimes in a movie, he held her hand. He made no attempt to kiss her goodnight. Her feeling was one of relief with a curious sense of inadequacy. It was almost embarrassing not to be able to arouse any passion in poor Alan. The next day, Lion Burke shows up, and he is an impressive individual. And the first thing that he needs is an apartment, and so they give Anne this task of finding him an apartment. And So she goes and tells Ellen this, and um, Ellen's going to give up his apartment and go get another apartment and let Lion Burke have his old apartment, which is a nice apartment. And I probably skipped ahead too far, but that's all right. If you remember Neely is Anne's friend. She wants to be in a Broadway show. And this is why. Anne asks, is that why you want to be in a show? To meet someone and get married? And Neely says, sure, because then I'm somebody. I'd be Mrs. Somebody. I'd live in one place. I'd have friends. People on the block would know who I was. So this is kind of sad. It kind of shows you who Neely is that the need for her identity, the thing that will make her somebody, is to be married to somebody else. And this was not uncommon at the time, right? In this relationship between men and women and the different genders, that women had to get married. And I wonder if that's still the case. I wonder if there's still that expectation. So yeah, this new apartment that Alan has, he says, you can have it for Lion. And had never really thought about Alan in this. Like she thought Alan was just a salesman, but Alan reveals that he is very, very, very rich, and that she is really the one person who. Oh, you can see down there. I'm still Alan Cooper. That's the only thing you do know about me, my name. Only to you, it doesn't seem to ring any bells. You accepted me as an unsuccessful little insurance salesman, and no one has ever really cared about me before. And he tells her, you are going to marry me, and tells her he loves her. And this is all kind of a surprise to Anne because she's not interested. So that night, Anne goes home and asks Neely if he's ever heard of Alan Cooper. She says no. The next day, she asks an attorney, George Bellows, in the office, do you know Alan Cooper? And he's like, oh, yeah, he's rich. And so it's all true about Alan Cooper. He is a very rich man, owns a big company. But Anne does then reveal that he's found an apartment. They send Lion Burke out. He loves it. And he says, can I take you to lunch? Or Lion invites Anne to lunch to thank him. Let's see, at that lunch, Lion tells a little bit about the war, but not much. He tells her to take off the afternoon and that he will pay her a 2-week bonus for finding the apartment for her. And at that moment, after spending some time with Lion Burke, Anne realizes that she has to tell Alan that she's not going to marry him. And so they have dinner. She tries to tell him, but they're moving around to different clubs and whatever. They go to one club and they meet Alan's father. They say, will you have a drink? And she says no. And the father says, you better learn how to drink if you're going to marry Alan. And she's like, but I'm not going to. And so it kind of spills out in this conversation that she's not going to marry him. And he never really, Alan, when he asked, he didn't really ask, he kind of told her. And so Anne says, I'm not in love with Alan. And Alan knows this. And he repeats this, she said she's not in love with me. Suddenly a newspaper person comes in that Alan and his family kind of had planned, and they take photographs, and everyone thinks Anne is really lucky for landing this guy. And when she's dropped off at home that night, Alan tells him again, I'm not going to marry you. And Alan asks if you're in love with someone else, and she says no. And he says, well, that's good enough for me. Just give me a chance. And when she got to her room, there's a note on her bed, Anne's bed, that says, wake Neely up as soon as you can. And so she does, and Neely announces that she's got a show. She's been cast in a show. She tells Anne that she should marry Alan, and asks, what are you giving up? And I love Anne's response here. So the question is, what are you giving up by marrying this person you don't love? And she says this, my identity, my future, maybe my future, my whole life, giving up before it begins. Nearly nothing ever happened to anyone in my family. They married, had children, and that was it. I want things to happen to me. I want to feel things. So the next day, reporters are waiting in her office with the newspaper. There's a headline: Broadway's newest Cinderella, Ellen Cooper to wed secretary. And so it's all a big news now. Lion is watching, is smiling, and Anne tells Henry, who's the boss, if you remember at the beginning, that she doesn't love him. And Henry kind of knows that she might want to go out with Lion. Let's see. Anne agrees to keep the engagement going until she turns 21, and then she'll call off the engagement. And I forget how old she is. She's 20, I think, now, so it's not even a year away. Ellen gives her a huge diamond ring. There's a beautiful actress at this club that they go to. Her name is Jennifer North. So Jennifer's going to be an important character as well. So we have Anne, Neely, and Jennifer are going to be important. They all meet, and there's the singer on stage. His name is Tony Polar, and he seems to be entranced by Jennifer North there, even though I think Jennifer's with somebody else. I think she's with Lion. So Jennifer North, as actress, is with Lion, but Tony Polar is on stage singing, and he sees Jennifer and is totally entranced. Let's see. And then there's an article in the next day's newspaper or something with a picture of Tony Polar and Jennifer North with the phrase "Broadway's newest romance." So things are all getting kind of crazy. Hopefully you're following this. So the show that Neely has been cast in has the star of the show named Helen Lawson. Okay, so Helen belongs to the agency that Anne works for, and Anne's sent to the show to get her signature on something. And so he goes and meets her with her, and Helen says, "Hey, wait a minute, aren't you the girl I read about, the one who got Ellen Cooper and the ring and all?" And she doesn't say yes, she says, "I'm Anne Wells." And again, just that response to talk is indicative of like how important her identity is to her. Let's see. I think they go back to, I don't know whose apartment they go back to here, but Alan calls, and Gino, who is Alan's father, wants to go on a date with Helen Lawson. And so they have this double date. Gino and Helen seem to hit it off. And they have a great time together. Gino and Helen, and Alan and Anne. Okay, so that night Anne gets home and Neely explains what a horrible person Helen is. And Anne's like, "No, Helen's fine. She's all chummy and she's a friend of mine." And Neely doesn't believe it. Ellen wants Anne to quit her job, and she reminds Ellen that she's not going to marry him. Let's see if there's anything else important here. Oh, Anne tells Helen about Neely, and so they're suddenly nice. Helen and Neely are friends now in the show. There's this conflict between Gino and Helen, and Gino doesn't like Helen anymore, and Helen keeps calling, and then Gino calls Anne and says, "Get Helen off my back." And so there's this all this drama going on that Anne doesn't really want or deserve, probably. And Anne says she's not going to be a part of this. Finally, Anne says, when is all this going to stop? She tells him again that she's not going to marry him, quite clearly. He talks about their future together, and she says, but I don't love you, Alan. And his response is, you don't love anyone. And he starts to brag about how good he is in sex, Alan does. So, anyways, Helen's new show, Helen and Neely's show, is opening up in New Haven. So they do like practice shows up in New England before they open in New York. And so Henry, who's the head of the agency, Lyon, who is his partner, and Anne are going to go to the opening of the show in New Haven. There's problems with the show, and they're going to try to fix it all out, fix it up. Anne meets Lyon at the bar of the hotel, and he says, never let anyone shame you into doing anything you don't choose to do. Keep your identity. Anne says, I don't think I have an identity yet. And Lyon's response is, everyone has an identity, one of their own, and one for show. I rather think you enjoy playing the passive Girl Friday role for the show while you look for the real you. And then gets a little more serious. And Anne asks Lyon, what are you fighting for, Lyon? And Lyon responds, you. And she responds, you don't have to fight. And there you have it. They go into the show, they hold hands during the show. Everyone loves the show. There's one minor star in the show. Her name is Terry King, and she's really, really good. But she's threatening to the star Helen Lawson, and we know that Helen might not be the best person in the show. So they all agree, the people of the show, to keep Ellen happy. They're going to fire Terry King, and they don't know who to replace her with. Anne says, why don't you replace her with Neely? And everyone seems to be happy, except for, of course, Terry King. But Helen's happy, and Neely's happy, and now Lyon and Anne are going out. Ellen and her went for a walk, and they kissed. She says, I love you, Lyon. And he says, I also won't hold you to that. They start to have a very serious relationship, Anne and Lyon, even though, as you know, Ellen thinks Anne's going to marry him. The next show that they watch is fantastic. Everyone's happy. Anne decides she's going to give the diamond ring back to Ellen. Let's see. Anne gets home to change work. Instead of going to her own house the first night they're back, she spends the night with Lyon. But when she goes home in the morning to change her clothes, and there's big flowers from Alan with a note, hope you miss me like I missed you. Call me the second you get in. So he finally calls her, and says, Ellen, I've got something to tell you. I'm not your girls, and I'm not engaged to you, and I want to give you the ring back. And Ellen begs and begs and begs. And Ellen says, and it happened, you fell out of love with me. And Anne is like, I never told you I loved you. And she says, please, Alan, may I see you at lunch tomorrow and return the ring? He says, no, my little iceberg, keep it. Keep it, you bee. I don't need the ring. I can buy a lot of them, but you're going to need it. Let it cut into your finger every time some guy screws you like you screwed me. I have a hunch Lyon Burke will be the first, and he hangs up. So they go to Philadelphia to watch the show, the opening of the show. Anne and Lyon do. They're going to leave on the late train. Helen is frantic because Gino didn't come. I mean, if you remember, Helen really likes Gino. Gino doesn't like Helen. And Lyon says, I got to go back to New York. Let's go back to New York. And she says, no, I have to stay with my friend. And Lyon's like, she's not really your friend. But she says, but Lyon, she's my friend. And he asks, and you choose to remain? And she says, I feel we should. I feel we should. He smiled and he says, okay, goodbye, friend. And he jumped into the cab and left. And so suddenly, just a few moments ago, where everything seemed happy, now everything is crumbling, and she realizes that she's hurting everyone around her, including herself, and she doesn't like it. And this is how Helen responds to her. If it wasn't for you throwing yourself at Lion Burke, Gina would be here now. I've lost a guy I love because of a little tramp. And so she's going to leave. Where do you think you're going? And Anne says, any place, just to get away from you. And Helen says, ha, honey, you got no place to go but down. Do you think anyone cares about you, you and your prissy blue nose? What in hell have you got that I should be your friend? Who are you, a stinking secretary and a big bore? And I lose a guy who digs me because of you. So she runs out in the lobby with her coat, Anne does, and it's kind of like passed out and sleeping there. And Jennifer North comes in. She's a singer, as you remember, there for the play as well. And she's like, here, you can come and stay in my room. And they become friends. When she gets home, there's a telegram about her Aunt Amy, who's passed away, and there's a funeral on Wednesday. This is from her mother, Anne's mother. It would be nice if you could attend. Love, Mother. So when she knows that her mother doesn't really care if she comes home or not. So instead, she has to talk to someone, so she calls Lion, but she just kind of hangs on the phone, doesn't say anything. And he says, is this Elizabeth? And so that's another stab in the heart that he was expecting a call from someone else. So she goes to work the next day. Anne and Lion talk, and they make up, and they seem to be all right. Anne has to go to court and lie about Jennifer's first marriage so that she can get an annulment, get a divorce. And she doesn't like to lie, but it seems like people do that all the time. Lion asks her to move in with him, but she says if people are in love, they get married. They don't move into each other. And so Anne and Jennifer get a apartment. And by the way, she's not forgetting Neely. Neely has found a boyfriend, and she's all happy as well, doing very well in the show. All right, so this is the opening of the show in New York City. Let's see. Anne's gotten Jennifer and her an apartment that they share. Jennifer is going out with Tony Pollard because he is a star, he says. Anne's mom calls and needs money. She says, Jen, I didn't start and do without to send you to school in Switzerland just so you'd wind up as a showgirl making that kind of money. Oh, this is Jennifer's mom. So Jennifer's mom keeps, throughout the entire story, calling for money, wants money. Tells her to hurry and get married. Okay, great. The reviews of the show are fantastic. Again, everyone seems to be happy. Neely is going to marry Mel, who is a writer for radio in New York, when their sublease is up there. And yeah, so we'll talk about what happens in a minute. So Neely is working with a voice coach, getting rid of all of her clothes, getting a new image. She's working another gig in another club after her Broadway show every other night. And she gets a lot of great reviews. Someone says that no one around is like her. And she's young and attractive. And so she gets a movie deal to go into California and make $1,000 a week. In 1946, that's a lot of money. So she asked Mel to go, and he's like, no, I don't want to go. I would be Mr. Neely O'Hara, not Mel O'Hara. No one would respect me. And so again, back to this gender idea, like if he got the job, there would be no doubt that she would go, but because he doesn't want to be seen as inferior to her, he doesn't want to go, but he finally does agree to go with her because Mel is a pretty good guy. Lion announces he's writing a book about the war that he just finished. He's just finishing it. It's not quite done. let's see, Jennifer has trouble sleeping, and so she begins to take sleeping pills, and they seem to work. She goes to her doctor to get some more. Her doctor says no, but then she doctor shops and finds a doctor that will give her these pills. She is going out with Tony Pollard this whole time and wants to get married, but Tony doesn't want to get married, and she won't have sex with Tony until they get married. And suddenly she gets a telegram from Anne that says that Anne's mother is dead. Anne's mother died in a car accident. So it kind of breaks up the plan to marry Tony soon, because Jennifer drives her up to Lawrenceville. She gets more pills, Jennifer does, in Lawrenceville. Finally, I don't know what happens here, but Tony shows up at one of Jennifer's shows and says, let's elope now, and they do, so they go and get married. He starts to cry because he's so scared about being married. He keeps saying, Miriam will be mad. She's holler, it's your fault. You made me do it. Miriam is like the person it seems to be like his assistant, Tony Pollard's assistant, his secretary or whatever. And Jennifer is so happy because even though she's successful on her own, she says, you've made it. You're Mrs. Tony Pollard. And again, this gender power struggle. Miriam reveals to us, but not to Jennifer, that Tony Pollard is mentally and emotionally 10 years old, that he's not really an adult. And that's what Miriam is. Miriam's not really his assistant. Miriam is like the person who takes care of him every day. And she kind of reveals the whole story, that she's been raising him since she was 14. He tried to join the army, but was rejected. And so even though he's got a great voice and he's great personality up on stage, he really can't think beyond a 10-year-old's level. And so that's why Miriam has stuck close to him. All right, back to Anne. Lyon called. So while they made up, they kind of split. So they're not really seeing each other anymore, Anne and Lyon. Anne asks if they should get married. He says, let's wait until my book is published, and then we'll have some money and we can do that. Lyon comes up to Lawrenceville because Anne's up there for her mom's funeral. And he loves the place. Lyon loves the house. He loves the town. He loves everything about it. This is what he says. This is a wonderful house. You've been too close to it to appreciate it. It suits you. You know, you look like you belong here. And if you remember, Anne described her leaving Lawrenceville as escaping it, not just leaving, but escaping it. She doesn't want to be part of that. She doesn't want to belong there. She says, don't even say that jokingly. I don't regard that as a compliment. And he proposes that maybe they should get married and live in the house. And he could write there. It's quiet and all that. And Anne says, but Lyon, I hate it here. I hate this town, this house. And he then says, even with me? So again, he's almost putting her in this situation. Like she's being very clear, almost like she was clear with Ellen. I don't love you. I'll not marry you. And yet he was trying to impose his power upon her. And now here's Lyon who says, let's live here. And she's like, I hate it here. And she says, even with me. She says this, Anne does. When I came to New York, it was like a veil lifting. For the first time, I felt I was alive, breathing. And he says, you wouldn't even try to chance it for a year or two? And she says, Lyon, I'll sell this house. I'll give you all the money. I'll live in one room with you, but not here. And he leaves, frustrated. She says to him, nothing will keep me from being with you on Christmas, but he didn't wave back. She feels sick, that things are falling apart. Jennifer says they're going to have a Christmas party in their apartment in New York City. Anne says, sure, her and Lyon will be there, and she'll invite Lyon when she calls that night, but he never calls. So she spends Christmas Eve alone. And when she gets back to New York on Christmas Day, she gets this note. Dear Anne, thank you for the moment of reckoning. I should say the 5 hours of reckoning. It was quite a long train ride and gave me sufficient time to think things out. Until now, I have only given a part of myself to you, Henry, and writing. It's obvious I'm not capable of giving it to all three. I told you I have a bit of money. I also have access to a large unheated house in the north of England. I shall open a few rooms. I could live there for years on a few quid, and I shall write even in my if my knuckles are blue. I have enclosed the keys to my apartment, dear Anne. It is the one practical thing I can do for you. I've taken your wonderful gift, the typewriter. I loved you, Anne, but you are too wonderful to accept such a small part of a small person who tried to scatter himself in so many directions. So I shall concentrate on writing. At least in that way I can hurt no one but myself. Thank you for the most wonderful year of my life, Lion. So sad. So we skip back to Jennifer. This is 1947. She gets a letter from Anne, doesn't mention Lion. So they're, Lion's off in England and Anne's living her life. Jennifer and Tony are living in California. They're not very successful. Miriam gives her $50 a week. And she sends it to her mother, who says it's not enough. Let's see. The pills that Jennifer was taking, Neely's not taking. And so the pills, by the way, are called dolls. This is where they get kind of the phrase of the title of the book. The little dolls that they take to go to sleep or relax or do whatever they do. But they pop these pills. Neely's getting kind of too big for herself, and she's wants to split with Mel and be, the Hollywood movie star, and wants to catch him with a girl, and therefore then cause a divorce. But Jennifer thinks one way to maybe make their marriage stronger is to have a baby with Tony. So she gets pregnant and goes to talk to Neely, and I think it's Neely who's got a 20-inch waist and weighs 98 pounds because of all these pills and the drugs that they're taking. Neely says, Jennifer tells Neely she's pregnant, and Neely's like, I know where you can get an abortion. And Jennifer's like, I don't want an abortion. I want the baby. So that night she tells everyone that she's pregnant, and Miriam is confused about how this happens because all of the contraception that she made sure Tony used, and because she doesn't want him to reproduce, let's see. Jennifer calls Henry, a member of the theatrical agency, and says, can you get me a job in New York and try to get rid of Miriam? She asked Tony to get rid of Miriam. And let's see. Tony goes back to California, and so there's this very public separation in the newspapers, and Jennifer says the only release comes at night with the red dolls, with the pills that she's taking. Miriam shows up in New York and asks Jennifer if it's really Tony's baby. She says yes, and she says you better get rid of it. And this is when Miriam tells Jennifer that Tony is not an adult, and that the emotional and mental incapacities that he has can be passed on to the baby. And so this is what Jennifer does. She takes 3 pills, goes to sleep, and gets an abortion. She begins modeling, and she goes to France to make these, at the time, these very sexual movies. Not what we think today as pornography, but at the time, maybe they were. So Anne is in New York still as well, still working at the agency. She's not really gone out with anyone since Lion, and she knows that Lion's book is coming out in the next week. Anne at a party meets Kevin Gilmore, who runs a cosmetics company, and he kind of begins to interview her. and finally offers her a modeling job as the exclusive model for the cosmetics company on TV commercials. TV is kind of new, but they want her to be their exclusive model. She's so beautiful. So she agrees to do that. Let's see. She goes to tell Henry, the owner of the agency, she's leaving, and they depart on good terms because she's going to become this TV model. And Henry tells Anne a little bit about Lyon. A man who could cut every tie that way Lyon does is a man who could never care deeply. Lyon is like Jennifer in a way. They fall in love, the Lyons and the Jennifers, but they can walk away unscarred because number one always comes first. Remember it, Anne, you're young. Keep those eyes wide open. And when you meet another guy who's for real, grab him and run for the hills. Don't hang around the glamour belt too long. Neely by this time has 2 kids, Bud and Judd, but she doesn't really care about them. She's taking more pills. Her new husband, Ted, has been caught cheating with both girls and boys, men and women. And so she decides to take a whole, I don't know if she takes the whole bottle of pills yet or not, but she has been nominated for an Oscar for 2 years in a row, so she's very, very successful. Lyon's book did not get good reviews when it first came out. Let's see. Neely wins the Academy Award. She fought the divorce for 3 years because, again, she really has no identity of herself. But she's unraveling. She has lost 2 movies her last 2 movies had lost money, and she's taking more and more pills. She's drinking more and more, and she goes to a psychiatrist to try to figure things out, but she's spiraling out of control. Now Lyon's book is getting good reviews, but it's not selling. Let's see. We're still with Neely. The head of the movie studios tells Neely, you got one more chance. Let's do this one movie, but it can't fall behind. We're on a tight budget. And of course, she shows up time and time again, drunk or on pills, and so they take her off the movie. Let's see. Neely goes home, takes 5 red pills, and then takes more pills, and she wakes up in the hospital. The newspapers call it an accident. But she really tried to take too many pills. Yes. Let's see. Back to Anne at 57. She's with Kevin Gilmore now, the cosmetic company. She's heard rumors about how bad Neely is doing in California. Let's see. I enjoy your company, Kevin. She says, I enjoy you in bed. I enjoy working for you. Perhaps this is love. But they haven't really gotten married or anything yet. I don't think they've been married yet. Neely shows up and Kevin is convinced to sponsor a 1-hour TV special with her. So Neely's going to make her big comeback on live television. They all go to see Helen Lawson's new Broadway show, which is a flop. Helen shows up afterwards when they're eating. Let's see. It's at a club, and so when Neely shows up, everyone is excited, and Neely goes up and sings 6 songs. Everyone loves them. Everyone gives her a standing ovation except Helen. They go into the bathroom, and Helen and Neely are fighting. And if you remember, Helen's the one that helped Neely get her first job on that first show. So let's see, I forget whose hair. I think Neely pulls Helen's hair off, throws it in the toilet. Yes, okay. So they're rehearsing for the TV special that Neely's doing. Nothing is working. She's taking pills. And the night of the show, Neely walks off. And so she gets a year suspension from all work by the union, by the actors union or whatever, and she can't do that anymore. Um, and thinks about how much a place can change you, how much California has changed Neely, how much Lawrenceville changed her, or how much New York has changed her. And Anne runs into Ellen, who has a new wife, and they just make this small talk. It says, Anne felt sad. People parted, years passed, they meet again. And the meeting proved no reunion, offered no warm memories, only the acid knowledge that time had passed and things weren't as bright or as attractive as they had been. She was glad Lyon was in England. She'd hate to run into him like this, to find that his hair had thinned or that the girl he dated was too young, too insipid. It was better to keep a memory intact. Jennifer, meanwhile, who made these movies, who was making these movies in Paris, has a deal for 3 movies. She's making $1 million. She's lost all this weight. She weighs 118 pounds and she's 5'6". She's got a facelift. So everything's working for Jennifer now. She's beautiful. So I think she's in New York with Anne, and they have lunch or whatever, and Anne's openly saying that maybe she should have moved to Lawrenceville with Lyon, and Jennifer says, but a man who could walk away like that, Anne, he never really cared. Anne really believes, though, that he loved me. I know he did. Meanwhile, Kevin has a heart attack, and in the hospital, like when he's dying, he says, promise me one thing, if I make it, will you marry me? And so what are you supposed to say? So poor Anne agrees to marry him, and he pulls through. And so they're going to get married, Anne and Kevin. Neely got fired from another movie. She shows up at Anne's house looking for help. Basically, it's just a friend of some kind. Let's see, we'll get to them in a minute. Jennifer, meanwhile, who's separated from Tony Polar, meets a new man, Winston Adams, who is a United States Senator. Let's see. So they would kind of love each other, it seems like. Jennifer, though, goes into the hospital because she has polyps in her uterus and they find a lump in her breast. They tell her that it's breast cancer and they have to give her a mastectomy, which is the removal of the breasts that are cancerous, and both of them, I think, are. So let's see. So she's in the hospital, and this operation has to happen quickly, or else the cancer is going to spread. And the senator, Winston, shows up and grabs Jennifer in her arms and is like, God, I almost died of fear. The doctor was so strange on the phone, said you needed an operation, hinted that the wedding might have to be postponed, and now to see you looking so beautiful. What kind of operation, darling? And she says, it's pretty drastic. I'll be scarred and won't be able to have any children. And the senator's like, hush, not a word. Shall I tell you something? I was going along with the whole thing because of you, the children, I mean. At my age, I really didn't care one way or the other, but I wanted to please you. You seemed to want it so much, so I pretended it was important to me. All I care about is you. Can't you understand? And they hold each other, and they cry, and then Winston says, yes, you and your beauty and your breasts and all of that, and that's what I love. And so when Jennifer realizes that this is important to him, she runs out of the hospital that night, takes 2 piles of pills, and leaves 2 notes. One is to Anne. It says, Anne, no embalmer could make me up as well as I do myself. Thank God for the dolls. Sorry I couldn't stick around for your wedding. I love you, Jen. And then the other one is to the senator. It says, Dear Win, I had to leave to save your babies. And the babies was the word for that part of the body. Thanks for making it almost come true, Jennifer. I don't know why this is so sad to me. I'm not sure. We should be almost done, I think. Neely's voice isn't working anymore. I mean, it works, but she can't really sing. She tries to kill herself as well, taking pills, cutting herself. She wakes up in the hospital and goes to Bellevue, which is the like the mental hospital there in New York City. Anne says that she will pay for 1 year of psychological treatment, and so they put her into this treatment center. Anne and Kevin agree to put off their marriage until they take care of Neely. So she can't really leave. Neely can't leave this place. At the beginning, they have to put her in restraints, and she hates it. But after about a month, that she kind of enjoys it, and she likes the people that she meets, and she visits, and she gets to know the people around, that she's with. Let's see, Kevin, he sold the company so he could marry Anne, but they haven't been married. He blames all of this on Neely. And one day, Lyon shows up. He's still single. Let's see. There's this conversation between Anne and Kevin. And Kevin says, "Anne, you're my life. I can't live without you." Anne says, "You won't have to, Kevin." Kevin says, "Is that a promise?" And he's like crying. And she says, "Promise." She said, "Miserably." So she's being kind of stuck in this. But at the same time, she meets up with Lyon. And Lyon says this, "It's all the same, Anne. I want to take you in my arms this moment. I feel as if we've never parted." And Anne says, "I want to be in your arms, Lyon." And Lyon says, "It's a deal, but I think it's best if I pay the check and we get the hell out of here." So there's no hesitation when they see each other again, that love and that spark between Lyon and Anne is still there. When she goes home early the next morning, Kevin is waiting for her and tells her that she has to choose either him or me. And Anne promises never to see Lyon again. Let's see. Anne doesn't call Lyon, but he knows that she's waiting there. They go to Kevin and Anne go to a club. Lyon is there with a younger girl, and she wonders how many other girls that he's had. And this was a miserable. Anne says this was the most miserable night of her life. Kevin tells Anne this after observing that night. Kevin says, "See, my pet, your lion is still roaring. He can have his," I'm not sure what word that's supposed to be. "Well, cheer up. We're a set, you and I, two discards, and in a way I'm beginning to pity you. You're probably still dreaming of that wonderful night of love. Well, it was only a night he tossed to you out of sympathy and guilt. Sure, that's all it was. Did he plead with you to leave him, to marry him? You bet he didn't. When he marries, it will be a dish. He liked you when you were 20, and even then walked out on you. It was good old Kevin who picked up the pieces. Kevin who made you rich and famous. The shoe is on the other foot now. I call the shots from now on. Tomorrow you hand in your notice." And Anne says, "Kevin, you really hate me, don't you?" And Kevin says, "No, I feel sorry for you like you have for me," which is the truth. And Anne says, "If you mean that, please leave for good, Kevin." And he says, "Oh no, not until I see you really go down the drain." So Kevin walks out, and 10 minutes later, Lyon walks up to him, and she says, "I was beginning to give up hope." And he says, "She left." And there you go. Let's see. Later that night, Kevin calls Anne and says, Anne, forgive me. I just told Lion Burke something happened to me tonight. I went crazy. Anne, tonight never happened. I didn't mean a thing I said. Anne, are you listening? And Anne says, Kevin, it's no good. It's over. He says she can see Lion on the side. Oh, he says, you can see Lion on the side as long as you come home and stay with me. Lion now tells her she has a choice to make. And he says, she says maybe she would like London. He says you'd grow to hate it. And so he goes back to Kevin. Oh, jeez. It's almost over, I think. She wonders how she could hurt Kevin so bad. Let's see. Let's see if we can get to the main part here. Lion gets a job to write an article about Neely and her comeback. And let's see. Henry's going to retire, and he wants Anne asked Henry to give the agency to Lion so Lion could stay, and Anne's going to pay for it. So he loans Lion the money. She puts up the money for Lion to purchase the agency, and everybody knows, Henry and George and all the other people at the agency know this is going to be a problem because no man wants a woman to be the person who pays for everything. Let's see. Neely has gotten healthy again. She's not as beautiful as she used to be. In fact, she gives a concert in Toronto and she comes on the stage and she's much bigger than she used to be. And she says this, I'm really fat, but so are a lot of opera singers. Only with me, you're not going to get opera. I'm just here to sing my heart out for you. And my heart is big and fast too. So if you like, I'll do a lot of singing. The applause was deafening. She was fantastic. Her voice was amazing. She goes to New York. Every show that she does is sold out. Let's see. Lion finds out that Anne bought the company, the agency, for him, and he's like as if you're trying to buy me, as if all the men in this story haven't been trying to buy Anne somehow with diamond rings and with jobs and all that stuff. Here's Anne trying to do something nice, and she says, Lion, I did it out of love. Do you understand? He says, I understand only one thing. The agency is going to be the biggest agency in town, in the world. You bought it for me, my girl, and you're going to get your money's worth. I'll show you. And the first thing I do is book reservations to take our pig, who's Neely, to Los Angeles. Christmas be damned, full speed ahead. So I think by this time, Lion and Anne are married, and they have kids, you can see here. Neely's a huge success in Los Angeles and in San Francisco, and Lion spends all his time with her, traveling, while Anne stays at home taking care of the kids. He was supposed to be home, for example, at the end of June. He didn't show up, and it's clear that you can see here, she saw something in the paper that said this, what a legendary singing star who has made a phenomenal comeback attributes it, along with her shapely new figure, to her new love. But the star's love story may not have a happy ending. Her love is her manager, who is very much married to a television beauty. So Lion and Neely now are at item. Anne is now taking pills. She found out about the pills and is now taking them. One night, one of their babies has a fever. She tries to call Lion. He's nowhere to be found. They rush to the hospital. The baby has pneumonia, and the baby's in the hospital for 10 days, but Lion comes every night to visit with the baby and stay with the baby. Neely is also taking pills. Says she'll take more pills if Lion doesn't come over. Lion says, we have to do something about this. Anne gets a job on a game show, so she's still a TV star. Lion is spending more time at home, but Neely is taking more pills. She's rushed to the hospital, and they don't want to take her they don't want to use her anymore, so she gets fired. 1965, they're having a New Year's Eve party. Anne and Lion are. Anne is in the bedroom for a minute when two people come in. It's Lion and Margie, who's a young new actress that they have. And they sit in the bedroom and kiss. And then this is how the book ends. Anne, this is talking about Anne. She brushed her hair and freshened her makeup. She looked fine. She had Lion, the beautiful apartment, the beautiful child, the nice career of her own, New York, everything she had ever wanted. And from now on, she could never be hurt badly. She could always be busy during the day, and at night, the lonely ones, there were always the beautiful dolls for company. She'd take 2 of them tonight. Why not? After all, it was New Year's Eve. And so that's the end of the book, and I know it was long, but it's just a great story of this woman who seems to be beautiful, and both inside and outside, and all the struggles she has, and her struggle for identity and developing identity from her hometown to New York, to the identity that the men in her life are trying to force upon her. This kind of really is a story both about gender and about identity, and I won't take any more of your time. I hope you enjoyed it. There's also a movie called Valley of the Dolls that you can watch if you want to see the whole story, maybe told better than mine. But hopefully you enjoyed this, and if you have any questions, email me or text me, and I will see you next time.